Let's not forget this fact. What did Krishna do with the Yadavas, his own race? Remember, Krishna was a god. Now he is leaving his seed on the earth. He did not want to leave his seed on the earth beyond a point, because he felt that they were a threat to the regular humans, that they were extremely belligerent, that would go powerful and haughty over time and would start troubling the other regular people. So he would get them to fight against each other and vanquish each other. What did the Nephilim do? During the times of Enoch, the Nephilim had a civil war. God made the Nephilim fight each other. This is the classic playbook of God. What is the relationship between the biblical stories and the Puranas? I think personally I find a lot of similarities, especially when it comes to the story of giants. Looks like the Bible does actually a good job of explaining having their own origin story when it comes to giants, and giving a lot of insight and detail into what happened before the flood, the Great Flood. So when I talk about the Great Flood approximately happened around the 10,000 BC mark. So in my definition, I would say there is a pre-flood era, then there is a post-flood era. So in the pre-flood era, we can basically see that human beings began to live on the earth back in those days, and it was the best among the angels, Lucifer, God's favorite angel, who rebelled against God, swore curses with 200 other angels, and they actually landed in a place called Mount Hermon in Lebanon. These angels then bound themselves in curses and then decided to take wife of the women who are the daughters of men. So thus goes the story, where the union, the unholy union of the angels and the watcher beings and the extremely earthly daughters of men resulted in an offspring who were extremely gigantic in nature and terrible and terrifying to look at. This was a worldwide phenomenon. So for example, we have a few statistics like there were more than 1,94,000 giants before the flood set in, right? So God brought flood upon the earth to basically get rid of the giants. This is the biblical story. Now let's look at the Puranic lore. If you understand that the Rakshasas, who are Daityas and Danavas, they were actually born as the offspring of the sage Kashyapa and the daughters of Daksha. Danu, you got Danavas, and out of Diti's womb we had Daityas. So this is the Puranic lore. Now if you go into the biblical lore, it gets into the whole realm of how there was Shem, Ham and Japhet, and Ham, who was the kind of a rebel and an outcast, he goes to the land of Canaan, and the giants actually spring in the land of Canaan through the line of Ham. On the prima facie, it looks like both have independent stories running parallelly when it comes to the origin of the giants. But there are few things that you can make a note of. So there are a few giants who survived after the flood as per the Bible, and these giants are actually spread across multiple continents. They are in Africa, they are in Morocco, they are possibly in parts of North America, South America, parts of India. So it's very clear that a small percentage of the giants did survive the Great Flood, and they possibly hid themselves in underground passages, caves and God knows where else, and then they kind of, once the waters settled, they were once again back trying to torment the people of the new world that had come through after the flood had receded. So it's very clear to me that in the stories of Ramayana and Mahabharata, there are ample examples of giants being spoken of. Let's take the example of the Ramayana. So in the Ramayana, you have Kumbhakarna, who was a giant. Ravana himself was a multi-headed giant. You have a particular giant creature who looked like Cyclops, and his name was Kabana. Rama and Lakshmana encounter this monster on their way to finding Sita, and this monster is a Cyclops that has got huge hands, and it grasps Rama and Lakshmana, one in each hand. So then they decide to use their swords and sever the hands of this a demon, but it was basically a cyclops. What is a cyclops? It's basically an entity with one eye in its forehead. It doesn't have two eyes, and it's a monster like entity. This same cyclops creature is something that you find in Greek mythology, throwing boulders off certain islands near Crete and whatnot. So looks like this cyclops species was pretty ubiquitous in the ancient times, as seen in the Ramayana, as seen in the stories of Greek mythology also. So once again, you can definitely see parallels between Greek heroes, Greek giants, Greek mythology and Indian mythology. There's a very clear through line that you can actually pass. So for example, we talk about Heracles and his feats of valor and strength, which is also comparable to Hare Krishna, who is our version of the supreme god Vishnu, who took avatar on this land to rid the burden of the earth. So Heracles himself is credited with multiple achievements during his time, I think killing Medusa and many other monsters around him. So again, is the Greek mythology a dilution of the Indian version? And if you see, Krishna lifts Mount Govardhana with one finger, the kind of strength that nobody can fathom in their hearts and minds. So clearly, there are parallels. And then all of the demigods, starting from Zeus to all the other gods like Poseidon. So you have equivalents of the same on our side with people like Indra, Varuna, Agni, and all these entities have parallels. So I think the giant lore or mythology has a direct through line with Indian and Greek mythology, whereas the whole biblical mythology takes a turn of its own, right? It goes very deep into the mindset of the Asuras. So for example, I think in the second millennia BC, you have this very famous king called Ashur Banipal, who is ruling over Mesopotamia. He's called Ashur. And we know what the meaning of the Ashur is. Ashur is a man who lacks culture, civility and humanity, right? So he is the exact opposite of Sura. So if the Mesopotamian kings are being referred to as Ashuras, clearly we now know where the Ashuras came from. So now we can start drawing a global picture of where these guys came from. Possibly some of these giants may have originated with this Sumerian legend which talks about the Anunnakis. The Anunnakis were the people who came from heaven to the earth. That's the literal translation of the word Anunnaki. So if the Anunnakis are coming around and they are this big badass kind of kings with horns and they are built of giant stature, extreme intelligence, which is very much reminiscent of Ashuras. Ashuras even in our scriptures are credited with extreme intelligence and valor, and they were actually able to outsmart some of our gods. So I think this whole I would say interplay between Devas and Rakshasas is really a war between possible different extraterrestrial factions. The Anunnaki on one hand and maybe the Pleiadian Aryans on the other hand. The Pleiadian Aryans can be qualified. For example, if you see the description of Indra in the Rig Veda, Indra is really described as a man with blonde hair, blue eyes and white skin. So what are the dark-skinned, brown-skinned Indians doing worshipping Indra? So there was no racism back in the day. Remember that. So you have the Pleiadian Aryan Indra. They were the demigods. They were possibly having some kind of a fraternal relationship with the Indian race, right? The Indian race might have directly descended from the Pleiadian Aryans. They were the first angelic humans who occupied Atlantis. Now let's get back to Atlantis. The Pleiadian angelic humans who are living in Atlantis were progressively infiltrated by the Anunnaki. Atlantis itself goes down under the water because of the Anunnaki infiltration, and they succeed in submerging this civilization and once again creating the amnesia that Graham Pollock talks about, right? Everybody knows Graham Pollock, who talks about the collective amnesia of humanity, where there are portions of humanity where humanity is at such a zenith, at such a peak and having a glorious time, having the most wondrous technologies and feats, and suddenly it's back to the cave, all in a matter of 3,000 to 4,000 years. So it looks like, and this is where I tend to disagree with some of the ISRO scientists who are coming up on YouTube and talking about the linear progression of technology and time. I'm really sorry, it never really works that way. There is nothing. Linearity is a Western concept, and I heavily disagree with it, because the Vedic concept of time is cyclical, right? Time always goes round around through the revolution of the 4 yugas, the manvantaras and the kalpas, and all these units come together and they revolve continuously. And so time tends to, history repeats itself through time, through episodes and events. So if that is the case, we really have to assume that before the flood, humanity was in possession of some really fantastic technology with the likes of Atlantis, which goes down under the water. And then possibly what happens later is that humanity, which rises up again, will have to rediscover some of this technology, right? Reinvent this technology and once again attain a level of glory before being pushed back again by history. So let me also make some parallels. Let me also bring in the elements of UFOs here. Worldwide, we are seeing an explosive growth in UFO sightings. How is this happening? Most people do not understand this. In the 1940s and 1950s, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, led by Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was a famous occultist in the United States. He experimented heavily with the occult, and he also founded the religion of Scientology. We know what Scientology is, right? It's all those people who don't believe in religion, but Scientology itself is a religion, so it's a dichotomy. Leave it there. But Jack Parsons delves into the occult. He was a big follower of Aleister Crowley. He conducts a big occult ritual using the principles of Thelema to open up a gateway or a portal for these, kind of fuzzy and extremely malevolent entities to come through into this space. In fact, after this ritual was successfully performed, it took 3 years for Jack Parsons to get this ritual right, and he did it in the 1950s. What began as Aleister Crowley's initial experiment to usher in the Eon of Horus in 1904. And that was his idea. He wanted to basically reverse the progression of time. He very well knew that a golden age was coming through. Kali Yuga actually has ended already. Possibly the occultists in the 1900s, including the likes of Jack Parsons, knew that a golden age was coming, and they were desperately making a last-ditch attempt to reverse the flow of time, to usher in a new age of Horus. And Horus, who is Horus? Go back to Egyptian mythology. In Egyptian mythology, we have Osiris and Isis. These were the founders of the Egyptian civilization, right? We know the story of Osiris, right? Osiris has a battle with Set. Set cuts him up into pieces, and then Isis has to bring him back together and resurrect. This whole concept of resurrection, and then followed by Judgment Day. So this whole Christianity also has an angle, coming into the Egyptian lore, correct? So what I'm trying to say is that if you look at the Egyptian side, Horus was the son of the union of Osiris and Isis, right? And Horus is always represented as a person who is led with one eye. He actually loses one eye, possibly in an accident or a skirmish. Let's look at the one eye symbolism. Odin, Norse mythology, very famous conqueror, but mythology, one-eyed Jack. Let's talk about our friend from the Indian mythology, Shukracharya, one-eyed Jack, preceptor of the Danavas. Okay, the one-eyed symbolism is based on possibly Lucifer losing one of his eyes. The Americans possibly were trying to reverse the flow of time because they understood a golden age was coming up. Now, whether they have been successful or not, we are not quite sure, right? Today the world is in a slightly messy place. We are not sure who is good, who is bad. So let's come back to the question of UFO. So the UFO explosion of UFO sightings started happening after the Jack Parsons experiment. Once Jack Parsons had completed his occult experiments and opened up a portal, all these superfluous entities started entering our realm, and UFO sightings started increasing. This brings into question the very nature of the UFOs themselves. Are UFOs demonic? Are UFOs angelic? Are UFOs really extraterrestrial? Are they a mix of everything? Who's going to answer this question? I will at least make an attempt today, because now we have certain validations provided by history and certain experiments in occult that were conducted, using which portals were opened. People tend to give the atomic blast a lot of credit, saying that it ripped open, the fabric of space-time. I think that's an overreach. Multiple experiments have been performed over multiple geographies over the years, and I don't see that as a big red flag. The red flag is really the occult experiments which are even today going on perhaps in certain places, ushering in these entities. The fantastic technologies that UFOs display perhaps is a sign of deception, because all these entities, negative entities, seek to deceive humanity. They want to perhaps pose as extraterrestrials, say that we are from different planets, and then deceive humanity into surrendering, because then, as like the Bible says, they can say they will declare themselves as God, and everybody has to then bow down to them. So there is that angle of UFOs which we are not understanding. Beyond the fantastic technology that they exhibit, beyond the Pentagon videos that got released in 2017, beyond all this nonsense, we really need to ask ourselves this question: who are these people, and why are they playing cat and mouse with us? Why this secrecy? Why this deception in the skies? If they were such benevolent beings, why aren't they coming down to us and speaking to us like how I'm speaking to you in front of the camera? These questions need to be answered. Why are these things happening in secrecy? Why are militaries of the world operating in secrecy when it comes to UFOs? How does the UFO lore tie into giants? For example, every time a new stock of humanity was created, in our own Puranas we talk about how every succeeding generation of humanity had a lesser height. So for example, people in the Satya Yuga were of amazing stature. So we know the story of this particular king and his daughter, who actually traveled to Brahmaloka in the Satya Yuga and wait for an appointment with Brahma to meet him by midday, because Brahma is busy in his own entertainment and matters. He attends to them by midday of his day. These two people actually met with Brahma. Then Brahma came around and said, what are you guys doing here? So he said, okay, you know what, I just want to marry my daughter off to somebody who is worthy to take her hand. So like, why did you even come here? Do you know how much time has elapsed? Right now it is not even Satya Yuga. Right now Krishna and Balarama are on earth, and they are in right now ruling over the earth, and they are part of the Mahabharatha. So then he says, go back to earth, ask Krishna and see if he takes your daughter in marriage. When these people return from Brahmaloka to the earth, by the way, remember this, from Satya Yuga going to Brahmaloka is an act of time travel, distance travel, and then coming back. By the time they come back, the entire landscape of the earth that they knew back in Satya Yuga has changed, right? Different looking people, different looking buildings, right? Different landscapes, everything has changed, dharma has changed. So when they come, they are in for a shock, they're like aghast. Then they go and meet Balarama and Krishna, and then Balarama takes in marriage that girl. And then what happens is, that girl apparently is probably, let me make an estimate, she's probably 30 to 40 foot tall. I'm really sorry, but this is how human height has decreased over the yugas. Balarama himself might have been 9 to 10 feet tall. He's like, how do I even bring that girl to my height? He actually uses his agricultural implement to drag her down and bring her to her height. It's obviously a supernatural feat. So don't try to apply too much of your scientific mind there. But he, in essence, brings her back to the height of a normal person back in Dwapar Yuga. Okay? Now, let's also look at some of the other Puranic lore. Mandata. King Mandata was part of the Solar dynasty. He was one of the most formidable kings, and he had a good time. Then he relinquishes his kingdom, goes to Vanvas. Not only that, by the time King Mandata finished his tenure, Treta Yuga had concluded and Dwapara had begun. So this is the statement in the Puranas. He says, the Yuga has changed, people have changed, people's mentality has changed, people's temperament has changed. Right? So the exact statement given in the Puranas is, Mandata, perceiving diminutive people, right, in the age, went north towards the Himalayas. So Mandata himself would have been a 15-16 footer easily, right? And he's perceiving all these 10 footers, 11 footers, and he's thinking all this, some, dwarf people, I can't live with them. So this is what happens with every age, people's height gradually declines. Now whether this is by design or all of a sudden people are born short, I don't think so. Probably we have to argue and say that with every passing yuga, a new stock of humanity is somehow released into this planet. Now how is it happening? Do UFOs have a role to play in it?
do the watcher beings actually are genetically engineering a new stock of humans for every yuga, because they are the watchers. What is their duty? To watch over humanity. And with every passing yuga, if there is a standard specification in the user manual laid out in terms of what should be the height of an individual, and that is the template that they follow to create a new stock of human. So in the Kali Yuga, our height is even lesser. We are much more diminished in height now, right? So point is that human height has always been on the decline. Now with better nutrition, these days people are growing a little taller, playing basketball, having better lifestyles and whatnot. But still, it is not something that you are able to exceed your genetics way too much. You are still playing within the same range of heights that human beings have come to accept. So let us be clear on this. So what are the UFOs? So these UFOs, possibly the watcher beings, may have had a role in repopulating humanity every time there has been a cycle of upheaval in the earth, right? They possibly bring a new stock of humans, possibly they have deep underground bases where they are engineering, genetically manipulating. Like today we have CRISPR. Somebody says 20 years back there was some technology where you can do gene editing, just like how you can do video editing. People would have said you are a nut job. But today, gene editing is possible through CRISPR. So if CRISPR technology, which is basically an act of God, right? When you try to engineer a new species of any animal or human, you are playing an act of God. So you are becoming like a God onto the people whom you create. So this whole genetic manipulation may have happened through these UFO watcher angel kind of entities who might be repopulating humanity every now and then, and even changing the landscape. For example, trees were much taller in the ancient times. So everything was tall, animals were taller, humans were tall, and then the entire landscape gets repopulated. I think you guys, I would strongly encourage you to watch some of the videos of John Levy. I think John Levy is one of these really famous amateur explorers who has gone deep into the subject of how Americas was probably populated by an entire nation of giants before the arrival of Columbus, before the arrival of Amerigo Vespucci and some of the other early American explorers, because he goes on to say that some of the buildings that are seen in San Francisco, Washington, you name it, Utah, Omaha, Ohio, all across the United States, these are magnificent pieces of architecture which are attributed to some of the architects of the 1800s, but it is utter garbage. Even to this day, we are not able to replicate buildings of this style and of the architecture. The American style of architecture, the buildings that we see in Manhattan, in New York, the modern buildings are extremely geometric in nature with sharp edges and with no intricacy, no architecture. I mean, this is not like the Hoysala architecture we are talking, right? We are talking American architecture with flat buildings, flat windows, and everything looking like a cube and a cuboid. That is their minimalistic architecture that we have come to see in Americas. But if you see the older buildings in America, they're extremely artistic. In fact, they use this terminology called Gothic style of architecture. And the buildings are so huge, they can't even replicate. We don't even have machines to build some of these buildings. The bars, the beams, they're so heavy. We don't even have the cranes today. So then the question arises, the early settlers of America who came possibly from Europe, or possibly repopulated by our watcher friends, and they come into the Americas, they possibly see all these giants walking around, and lo and behold, there is a catastrophic event that happens in the US called the mud flood. In one single day, earthquakes happen, and the mud is turned into, it basically melts due to excess heat. There's a huge event in the sky, everything blacks out. Next thing you know, buildings have melted. There are buildings in India which show signs of extreme heat, which are just melting, the tops are melting. And if you see the buildings in America, they have clearly shown how the tops of buildings have melted. That means under extreme heat, some of these buildings have experienced and they have melted. And today, some of the mountains that we see in certain parts of the world, they are not organic mountains like the way you and I imagine it to be. Maybe they were buildings of old which just basically got totally melted under extreme heat, and over time lost its texture, lost its intricacy. And today, there are areas where, for example, in the Anasazi area in the US, where they say they built forts, or in Jordan, in Petra, where looks like they built buildings into the rock. That's actually impossible to do. Nobody can do it. Even to this day, no architect will attempt it. Why? It is not possible. The only logical explanation is they were once upon a time buildings which were turned into rock through this extreme heat metamorphosis. And if you are willing to accept that theory, then you also have to accept the concept of pralaya, which is very much mentioned in Hinduism, that Lord Sankarshana during the end times brings extreme heat upon the earth followed by a flood. So it starts with fire and ends with water. So we have to add multiple data points of multiple cultures. No single culture has the story yet. But if we start connecting the dots, for example, what did Krishna do with the demons? From Putani to Denuka to possibly all the other demons he overcame. Some of them were giants. Let's not forget this fact. What did Krishna do with the Yadavas, his own race? Remember, Krishna was a god. Now he is leaving his seed on the earth. He did not want to leave his seed on the earth beyond a point, because he felt that they were a threat to the regular humans, that they were extremely belligerent, that would go powerful and haughty over time and would start troubling the other regular people. So he would get them to fight against each other and vanquish each other. What did the Nephilim do? During the times of Enoch, the Nephilim had a civil war. God made the Nephilim fight each other. This is the classic playbook of God. God creates civil war among people he doesn't want to have on the earth, gets them to fight each other, kills them off so that the earth is rid of the burden. But I will still be a little critical of Krishna and Vishnu because his policies created a political vacuum in India. Pandavas and Kauravas, basically they had this fratricidal war. Pandavas won, Pandavas went to heaven, then the descending line of Pandavas probably ends in 3 generations in Janmejaya, and after that you will not see a single Pandava king into Kali Yuga. The Pandava line ends, the Kauravas are vanquished, the Yadavas are vanquished. Who else is going to rule India? So when big stalwarts, talk about India's history as being glorious and how political vacuums, small kings were being exploited by certain Islamic invaders, I mean, you can't blame the Islamic invaders. There's a bloody political vacuum here. And who created the vacuum? Krishna. Okay, the Ashokas, the Mauryas, they ruled for a while, but even they got, sidelined after a while. Weak kings started ruling, they were vanquished. There was no single stabilizing force in India which allowed foreign kings to invade this land. Okay? So please understand that sometimes Krishna's decisions, see, this is my personal opinion. I am a true believer. I probably admire Krishna for all his feats. I am a worshipper of Krishna. But this is my academic opinion that Krishna left a political vacuum, the heat of which we are feeling to this day. Because no stable king was there. It was always guerrilla warfare with the likes of Shivaji and a few brave kings. Then Prithviraj Chauhan, a Rana Pratap there, a Rana Sangha there. Come on, this is hodgepodge history. We can keep blaming the communist historians saying that, look, they are not celebrating our achievements. Some Jat lady came and defeated Taimur Lame. Correct, but that is a one-off incident. The fact is Mughals ruled over 250 years. The British ruled for much longer. Something is wrong in this picture. Basically, India's political military might was laid to waste after the Mahabharata, possibly to completely eliminate the rule of giants, but when they did that, a political vacuum was created which was never supplanted till this day. It's been extremely tough going for the Indians and the Indian race. So this is my analysis out there. So I would encourage you to leave comments. Let's start a debate in the comment section. These are my thoughts, random thoughts that I have actually shared about contemporary cultures and a study of giants and how they intermingled. I also like to learn from you, the viewers. I'm sure you have plenty to share as well. I'll see you in the next video.